The blazing Montana sun cast long shadows across Fort Benton as dust rose from beneath Wylie Warren's worn boots. Her heart pounded with each desperate step toward the Silver Creek mine, where black smoke billowed into the clear blue sky. The explosion had shaken the entire town just minutes ago, and now screams and shouts filled the air as townsfolk rushed toward the mine entrance where debris still settled. Wylie's throat constricted with fear. Her father and brother were both down in that mine, along with 20 other men from Fort Benton. At 22, she'd already lost her mother to consumption 3 winters past, and the thought of losing what remained of her family sent her racing faster than her skirts would allow. "They're trapped," someone shouted as Wylie pushed through the gathering crowd. The main shaft collapsed. It was 1879, and Fort Benton had grown from a simple fur trading post to a respectable town serving as the innermost port accessible by steamboat on the Missouri River. The Silver Creek mine had opened just 2 years prior, bringing prosperity and new settlers to the area, but mining remained dangerous work. The mine foreman, a stout man named Hollister with a perpetually furrowed brow, stood at the mine entrance, frantically giving orders to those around him. When Wylie approached, her auburn hair coming loose from its pins, he held up a hand to stop her. "Miss Warren, stay back. We're organizing a rescue, but it's unstable." "My father and Thomas are in there," she said, her voice breaking. "How many are trapped?" "At least 15 men," Hollister replied, wiping sweat from his brow despite the autumn chill. "The main support beams collapsed after the blast. We're getting equipment together now." Wylie wrapped her arms around herself, scanning the faces of miners who had escaped, hoping to see her father's weathered countenance or her brother's boyish grin. Neither appeared among the soot-covered men receiving medical attention. A commotion near the edge of the gathering drew her attention. A tall figure dismounted from a chestnut stallion, moving with fluid grace despite the urgency of the situation. Even from a distance, Wylie recognized Isaac Vance, the notorious cowboy who'd ridden into town 3 months ago and promptly earned a reputation as a skilled horseman and occasional troublemaker. His dark hair fell over intense eyes as he strode toward the mine entrance, ignoring the whispers that followed him. Isaac had worked as a miner in Colorado before turning to cattle driving, or so the rumors went. What no one disputed was his independence and reluctance to form attachments in town. "What happened?" Isaac demanded, approaching Hollister. "Blast went wrong. Support beams collapsed. We've got men trapped with limited air," Hollister explained. Isaac surveyed the mine entrance, his expression hardening. "You're planning to dig them out through the main shaft?" "That could take days." "We don't have a choice," Hollister said, gesturing to the blocked entrance. "There's the old vertical shaft," Isaac said, pointing to a hillside about 50 yards away. "It was sealed last year but connects to the main tunnel. I could break through and reach them that way." Hollister shook his head. "Too dangerous. That shaft was closed for good reason. It's unstable." "More unstable than men suffocating underground," Isaac challenged. Wylie stepped forward, unable to contain herself. "Please," she said, looking directly at Isaac. "My father and brother are down there." Isaac's eyes met hers, and something shifted in his expression. Wylie had encountered him only in passing before at the general store or riding through town. They'd exchanged polite nods but little else. Now she saw determination replace his usual reserve. "I'll need rope, lanterns, and tools," Isaac said, turning back to Hollister. "And a volunteer or 2 who know the mine layout." "This is a fool's errand, Vance," Hollister argued. "You could cause another collapse." "Then I'll die trying," Isaac replied, already moving toward his horse to retrieve his own rope. As the men argued logistics, Wylie approached Isaac. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you for doing this." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Don't thank me yet, Miss Warren." Within minutes, Isaac had gathered the necessary equipment. Only one other miner, an older man named Gideon Fletcher, volunteered to accompany him to the abandoned shaft. The rest focused on clearing the main entrance. Though everyone knew that approach would take far too long, Wylie followed Isaac and Gideon to the old vertical shaft, her skirts gathering dust and her hands trembling with each step. She watched as they pried away the wooden boards that had sealed the entrance, revealing a dark hole descending into the earth. "We'll tie a rope here," Isaac explained, securing one end around a sturdy tree trunk. "If we find them, we'll send up 3 tugs on the rope as a signal." Wylie nodded, wiping away tears that had begun to fall despite her efforts to remain composed. "Please find them," she whispered. Isaac paused before his descent, meeting her gaze once more. "I will," he promised, with such conviction that Wylie almost believed him. She watched as Isaac and Gideon disappeared into the darkness, lanterns casting eerie shadows as they descended. Then she stood sentinel at the mouth of the shaft, wrapped in fear and desperate hope. Hours passed. The sun arced across the sky, beginning its descent toward the western mountains. Other women from town joined Wylie, bringing water and food that she couldn't bring herself to touch. Occasionally, she would kneel by the shaft opening, straining to hear any sounds from below, but only silence answered. As dusk approached, more tears streamed down Wylie's face. She'd barely moved from her position, refusing offers to rest or return to town. Her entire world had narrowed to this moment, this vigil. A young boy came running from the main shaft. "Miss Warren, they've made some progress clearing the entrance, but it'll still be hours before they break through." Wylie nodded absently, her eyes fixed on the dark hole before her. Just as the boy turned to leave, she felt a slight movement in the rope that dangled into the earth. "Wait," she called out, falling to her knees beside the shaft. The rope moved. 3 distinct tugs followed, the agreed-upon signal. Wylie's heart leaped into her throat as she turned to the small gathering. "They've found them. They're alive." The next hour was the longest of Wylie's life. She stood at the shaft entrance, watching as miners came to assist, ready to help pull survivors to safety. When the first soot-covered face emerged from the darkness, a cheer went up from the crowd, but Wylie remained focused, searching for the faces that meant everything to her. The 4th man to emerge was her brother Thomas, coughing and weak but alive. Wylie embraced him, sobbing against his filthy shirt as he assured her he was unharmed. "Father," she asked, pulling back to search his face. "He's coming," Thomas rasped. "Isaac found us, just in time." The air was getting thin. More men emerged, each one helped by waiting hands. Wylie's father appeared 7th, limping from a minor injury but otherwise intact. As she held her family, relief flooding through her, Wylie realized Isaac had not yet returned. She approached the shaft once more, peering into the darkness. "Mr. Vance," she called down. No answer came. One of the rescued miners explained. He and Gideon stayed behind to help the last men. "There was another small collapse after we started leaving." Dread filled Wylie as minutes stretched on with no sign of the remaining men. Just as rescuers were preparing to send someone down to check, a voice called up from below. "Need some help here." It was Gideon. "Got injured men." The final 3 miners were hoisted up with great difficulty, all suffering from injuries sustained in the secondary collapse. Gideon followed, his face grim as he emerged into the fading daylight. "Where's Isaac?" Wylie asked, her voice barely audible over the commotion. Gideon shook his head. There was another fall of rock. He pushed me clear but got caught himself. He's pinned down there, miss. We tried to free him, but... Wylie didn't wait to hear more. Before anyone could stop her, she grabbed a lantern and began climbing down the rope into the shaft. She heard shouts above her but ignored them, descending into the suffocating darkness with single-minded purpose. The air grew thicker with dust, and the sharp smell of explosives as she followed the tunnel that Isaac and Gideon had cleared. After what seemed like an eternity, the narrow passage opened into a wider area where she saw him. Isaac lay on his back, a heavy beam across his legs and debris surrounding him. "Miss Warren," he said when he saw her, his voice strained but somehow still carrying that same steady confidence. "You shouldn't be down here." Wylie approached, setting the lantern down. "Neither should you, Mr. Vance, yet here we are." A ghost of a smile crossed his dust-covered face. "Fair point." She assessed his situation quickly. The beam pinning him wasn't impossibly heavy, but it was wedged at an angle that made it difficult for one person to move. "More men are coming down," she said, kneeling beside him. "The tunnel's not stable," Isaac warned. "You need to go back up." Wylie ignored him, examining how the beam was positioned. "We saved my father and brother today because of you," she said, searching for a leverage point. "I'm not leaving you down here." Isaac watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Stubborn," he murmured. "You have no idea," Wylie replied, finding a spot where she might be able to shift the beam. "On the count of 3, I'm going to lift this end and you try to pull yourself free. It won't work." 1, she counted, bracing herself. "Miss Warren, 2. "Wylie," he said, using her first name for the first time. "It's too heavy." 3. She pushed with all her strength, muscles straining against the weight. To her surprise, the beam moved slightly. Isaac grimaced, but managed to pull himself a few inches before the weight became too much, and Wylie had to let go. "Again," she insisted, breathing hard. They tried twice more before voices and lantern lights signaled the arrival of rescuers. With additional help, they finally freed Isaac, who winced but insisted he could walk with support. The journey to the surface was slow and painstaking, but when they finally emerged into the cool night air, a cheer went up from those still waiting. Wylie helped Isaac to a makeshift medical station where the town doctor examined him. "Nasty bruising, but no broken bones," the doctor concluded. "You're a lucky man, Vance." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Isaac replied, his eyes finding Wylie where she stood nearby. "I had help." That night marked the beginning of something neither of them had anticipated. As Fort Benton celebrated the rescue and mourned the 3 men who hadn't survived the initial explosion, Wylie found herself drawn to the quiet cowboy who had risked everything for strangers. In the days that followed, Isaac recovered at the town's small hotel, refusing offers to stay with any of the families he'd helped. Wylie visited daily, bringing food from her kitchen and news from town. "The mine's closed indefinitely," she told him on her 3rd visit, sitting beside his bed with a basket of fresh bread and stew. "Mr. Hollister says they need to reinforce everything before allowing men back down." Isaac nodded, sitting up against the pillows. His room was sparse, just a bed, a chair, and a small table where his few possessions sat. "Your father and brother, how are they faring?" "Better each day," Wylie replied, arranging the food on the table. "Father's leg is healing well, and Thomas is already talking about finding work at the lumber mill until the mine reopens." "And you?" Isaac asked, his dark eyes studying her face. "How are you faring, Miss Warren?" The question caught her off guard. Few people asked about her well-being. As a woman who had taken over household duties after her mother's death, she was accustomed to caring for others rather than being cared for. "I'm grateful," she said simply, "and perhaps a little lost now that the crisis has passed." Isaac nodded as though he understood perfectly. Crisis gives us purpose. Its absence can be disorienting. They fell into a comfortable silence as Isaac ate, and Wylie realized it was the first peaceful moment she'd experienced in days. There was something about Isaac's presence that calmed the constant flutter of anxiety she typically carried. "Will you stay in Fort Benton?" she asked eventually. "Once you're healed, I mean." Isaac considered the question, setting down his spoon. "I hadn't planned to. I was passing through on my way to Oregon Territory when I took work with the cattle drive that brought me here." Disappointment washed over Wylie, though she tried not to show it. "Oregon is supposed to be beautiful. My mother always wanted to see it. And you?" "Have you lived in Fort Benton your whole life?" Wylie nodded. "Born and raised. My grandfather was one of the first permanent settlers after the fur trading post was established. He built our house with his own hands." "It must be nice," Isaac said quietly, "having roots like that." Something in his tone made Wylie curious. "Where are you from originally, Mr. Vance?" "Isaac," he corrected. "After what we've been through, I think first names are warranted." "Isaac," she agreed, finding she liked the sound of it on her lips. "I was born in Pennsylvania, but we moved west when I was young. My father chased mining prospects across Colorado, Nevada, Idaho, anywhere rumors of silver or gold led him." Isaac's expression grew distant. "We never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home. And your family now?" "Gone," he said simply. "Fever took my mother and sister when I was 12. My father died in a mine collapse in Colorado 6 years ago. The parallel to what had nearly happened to her own family wasn't lost on Wylie." "I'm sorry." Isaac shrugged, but she could see the old pain behind the gesture. "It's why I left mining. Took to open skies instead of tunnels. Seems ironic now. That you ended up in a mine collapse anyway." A small smile touched his lips. "That I ended up being glad I knew my way around one." Their conversations continued like this over the following weeks. Isaac healed quickly, soon able to walk around town, though he favored his right leg slightly. Wylie found excuses to seek him out, bringing meals, offering to show him around Fort Benton, introducing him to people he hadn't met. For his part, Isaac seemed content with her company, though he remained reserved around others. He found temporary work at the livery stable, his way with horses quickly earning him the stable owner's respect. As autumn deepened, painting the cottonwoods along the Missouri River in brilliant gold, Wylie realized with a start that Isaac had been in Fort Benton for nearly 4 months longer than he'd stayed anywhere in years, by his own admission. "You've not mentioned Oregon lately," she commented one Sunday afternoon as they walked along the river path. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. Isaac glanced at her, then back at the flowing water. "Winter's approaching. Not the best time to travel." "No, I suppose not," Wylie agreed, hope rising in her chest despite her attempts to temper it. They stopped at a bend in the river where a fallen log provided a natural bench overlooking the water. Sitting side by side, they watched as the current carried leaves downstream toward the distant Mississippi. "Your father asked me something interesting yesterday," Isaac said after a comfortable silence. "Oh," Wylie raised an eyebrow, wondering what her father had been up to. Since the mine accident, James Warren had taken a keen interest in Isaac, often inviting him to dinner and engaging him in long conversations. He asked if I'd considered buying land here. Isaac picked up a small stone and tossed it into the river. "Said there's a parcel for sale near your property that would be good for raising horses." Wylie's heart quickened. "And what did you tell him?" "That I'd think about it." Isaac turned to face her directly. "I've never owned land before, never stayed in one place long enough to consider it." "What's stopping you now?" Wylie asked softly. Isaac studied her face for a long moment. Fear, maybe, of putting down roots only to have them torn up again. Or maybe, Wylie suggested, gathering her courage, you just haven't had a good enough reason to stay in one place before. Something changed in Isaac's expression, a softening around his eyes, a certainty that hadn't been there before. Maybe I do now. He reached for her hand slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Wylie didn't. Instead, she twined her fingers with his, marveling at how natural it felt. Would you think me too forward if I told you you're the reason I'm still in Fort Benton? Isaac asked. His voice low, Wylie smiled, feeling warmth spread through her despite the autumn chill. I would think you finally noticed what's been obvious to everyone else in town for weeks. Isaac laughed, the sound rich and genuine. Is that so? Am I the subject of town gossip, Miss Warren? We both are, she confirmed. Mrs. Henderson at the general store asked me yesterday when I was going to stop pretending our walks were coincidental. And what did you tell her? That some things worth having take time. Wylie squeezed his hand. And that I was willing to wait. Isaac's expression grew serious again. I'm not a wealthy man, Wylie. I have savings from my work, enough to buy a small property perhaps, but nothing like the security your family has built here. I've never cared about wealth, she replied honestly. My mother and father married for love when they had nothing but a plot of land and hope. They built everything else together. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the water, Isaac stood and helped Wylie to her feet. Instead of releasing her hand, he drew her closer. May I call on you properly? He asked, his voice carrying a formality that made Wylie smile. You may, she replied, though I suspect my father has been expecting it for some time. Their courtship proceeded through the winter months, becoming the talk of Fort Benton. The cowboy who had saved the trapped miners and the daughter of one of those miners made for a romantic tale that locals eagerly embraced. Isaac purchased the land near the Warren property with his savings and began building a modest house and stables with help from Wylie's father and brother. He acquired 4 quality horses and struck a deal with a ranch in Helena to train stock for them. By spring, as the first wildflowers bloomed across the Montana plains, the house was finished, painted white with blue trim that matched the color of the sky. On a perfect April day, with the Missouri River flowing full from mountain snowmelt, Isaac and Wylie were married in Fort Benton's small church. The wedding reception spilled into the town square, with nearly every resident attending. Even Hollister, who had reopened the mine with improved safety measures, closed operations for the day so the miners could celebrate. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the square, Isaac led Wylie away from the festivities to a quiet spot near the river where they had often walked together. Are you happy? He asked, his arms encircling her waist. Wylie looked up at the man who had literally descended into darkness to save her family and in doing so had found his way into her heart. Happier than I ever thought possible. I've been thinking, Isaac said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. About what you said that day by the river about having a reason to stay. Wylie leaned into his touch. And, for years after my father died, I convinced myself that not having ties meant not risking loss. His eyes held hers in the gathering darkness. But standing at the mouth of that mine shaft, seeing you waiting there, I realized something. What? Wylie whispered. That some things are worth the risk. He kissed her gently. You gave me more than a reason to stay, Wylie. You gave me a home. The years that followed brought changes to Fort Benton and to the lives of Isaac and Wylie Vance. The town continued to grow as the Northern Pacific Railroad expanded through Montana territory, though steamboat traffic on the Missouri gradually declined. The Silver Creek mine operated for another 5 years before the ore was depleted. But by then, Fort Benton had diversified its economy enough to weather the change. Isaac's horse training business flourished. His reputation for working with difficult animals spread throughout the territory, bringing clients from as far away as Billings and Helena. He expanded the stables twice and hired 2 young men from town to help with the increasing workload. Wylie, meanwhile, opened a small school in a converted storefront on Front Street. With Fort Benton growing, the need for education had become pressing, and her own education more extensive than most women of her time thanks to her mother's insistence made her the ideal teacher. Their first child, a son they named James after Wylie's father, arrived a year after their wedding. Their daughter Ella followed 2 years later, bringing a completeness to their family that neither had dared to imagine in those tense hours at the mine. One evening in the summer of 1886, 7 years after the mine collapse that had brought them together, Isaac and Wylie sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the distant mountains. James, now 6, chased his 4-year-old sister through the tall grass, their laughter carrying on the warm evening breeze. "Father says the railroad might build a spur line directly to Fort Benton next year," Wylie commented, leaning against Isaac's shoulder. "That would be good for business," Isaac replied. "Shipping horses by train is far easier than driving them overland to the nearest station." Wylie nodded, watching as James pretended to be a wild stallion while Ella attempted to tame him, mimicking her father's gentle approach with horses. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd continued on to Oregon?" she asked after a comfortable silence. Isaac considered the question, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I look at all this," he gestured to their home, the children, and finally to Wylie herself, "and I know I ended up exactly where I was meant to be." Wylie smiled, remembering that fateful day at the mine when she had first truly noticed the quiet cowboy with the determined eyes. "You know, I've never properly thanked you." Isaac raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For saving my father and brother, for giving me this life." She turned to face him fully. "For breaking into that mine when everyone else said it couldn't be done." Isaac cupped her cheek with his calloused hand. "I think you've thanked me every day since, in ways you don't even realize." As darkness fell, and the first stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, Wylie reflected on how a single moment, a mine collapse, a desperate rescue, a vigil kept with tears and hope, had altered the course of so many lives. What had begun in crisis had transformed into something beautiful and enduring. A family, a home, a love that had taken root and flourished in the most unexpected of circumstances. The following spring brought new beginnings to Fort Benton. The railroad spur line was indeed approved, with construction set to begin in the summer. Isaac's horse training business secured a contract to provide mounts for the U.S. cavalry at Fort Assiniboine, necessitating further expansion of their operation. Wylie's school had grown to 40 students, requiring her to hire an assistant teacher, a young woman named Charlotte who had recently arrived from Minnesota. The town council was discussing plans for a proper schoolhouse, with Wylie consulted on its design and location. On a crisp April morning, as wildflowers carpeted the prairie surrounding their property, Isaac and Wylie rode out together to inspect a new stretch of fencing. These moments alone together were precious, carved out between the demands of business, parenting, and community obligations. "I received a letter yesterday," Isaac said as they dismounted near a grove of cottonwoods to rest their horses, "from a man named Robert Sullivan in Virginia City." Wylie spread a small blanket on the grass, setting out the lunch she had packed. What did he want? He's heard about my work with horses and wants me to come evaluate his stock. He's breeding race horses and needs someone with experience to help select the best bloodlines. Isaac accepted the sandwich Wylie handed him. It would mean being away for about 3 weeks. Virginia City. Wylie considered the distance. That's quite a journey. It is, Isaac agreed, but he's offering good money and the connections could be valuable. Wylie nodded, understanding the opportunity this represented. When would you go? That's what I wanted to discuss with you. Isaac met her eyes. He wants me there in June, but that's when they're breaking ground for the school. I know how important it is for you to be involved in that. Warmth spread through Wylie's chest at his consideration. Even after 7 years together, Isaac's thoughtfulness still caught her by surprise sometimes. We could make it work. Charlotte can oversee things for a few days if needed. There's another option, Isaac said, a hint of excitement in his voice. We could all go. Wylie's eyebrows rose. All of us. To Virginia City, why not? James and Ella would love the adventure. Your father has been saying he wants to spend more time with the children. He and Thomas could watch over our property for a few weeks. Isaac leaned forward, his enthusiasm growing. We could make it a family journey, see more of Montana together. The idea took hold in Wylie's imagination, traveling across the territory with their children, showing them the broader world beyond Fort Benton, experiencing new places together as a family. We'd have to plan carefully, she said, already mentally listing what they would need. The children have never traveled that far before. Is that a yes? Isaac asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Wylie laughed. It's a let's figure out how to make this work. Isaac reached across the blanket to take her hand. Do you remember what you told me years ago about your mother and father building their life together from nothing but a plot of land and hope? I do. That's what we're doing too, he said, building something together step by step. This journey could be part of that, showing our children there's a whole world beyond what they know, just waiting to be discovered. As they rode home that afternoon, plans taking shape between them, Wylie felt the same flutter of excitement she'd experienced when Isaac had first proposed marriage. Life with him had never been predictable, but it had always been rich with possibilities. The Virginia City journey became reality in early June. Wylie's father and brother gladly agreed to look after their property, and Charlotte proved capable of handling preliminary matters with the school construction. With trunks packed and arrangements made, the Vance family boarded the stagecoach that would take them the first leg of their journey. James and Ella were beside themselves with excitement, faces pressed against the windows as Fort Benton receded behind them. Isaac sat across from Wylie, his expression content as he watched their children experience their first real adventure. The journey took them through breathtaking landscapes, rolling prairies that stretched to the horizon, mountain passes where snow-capped peaks pierced the clouds, valleys where rivers curved like silver ribbons through lush forests. They stayed in small towns along the way, each with its own character and history that Isaac and Wylie shared with their wide-eyed children. Virginia City, when they finally arrived, proved fascinating in its own right. Once a booming gold rush town, it had matured into a more established community while retaining its frontier character. The Sullivan Ranch lay just outside town, a sprawling property with stables finer than any Isaac had worked with before. While Isaac consulted with Robert Sullivan during the days, Wylie and the children explored Virginia City, visiting its historic buildings, attending a theater performance, and making friends with local families. In the evenings, they would reunite, sharing stories of their day over dinner. Mr. Sullivan wants to hire me as a regular consultant, Isaac told Wylie one night after the children were asleep in their room at the boarding house. 4 visits a year to evaluate new stock and help with training programs. Wylie considered what this would mean. That's a significant commitment. It is, Isaac agreed, but he's offering to pay travel expenses for all of us each time. He says his wife is taken with the idea of the children visiting regularly. They have no grandchildren of their own yet. So this could become a family tradition. Quarterly journeys to Virginia City. Isaac nodded. What do you think? I know it would mean arranging things with the school each time. I think, Wylie said carefully, that seeing the children's faces as they discovered new places has been one of the greatest joys of this trip. I wouldn't want to deny them or us more of those moments. Isaac's smile was answer enough. They sealed the decision with a kiss, another step in the life they continued to build together. Their return to Fort Benton 3 weeks later was a homecoming celebrated by family and friends. James and Ella regaled their grandfather with tales of their adventures, each story more elaborate than the last. Isaac resumed his regular training work, now with the added prestige of his association with the Sullivan Ranch. Wylie threw herself into the school construction project, which had progressed well in her absence. As summer turned to fall, and another Montana winter approached, life settled into familiar rhythms enhanced by new possibilities. The quarterly trips to Virginia City became anchoring points in their family calendar, adventures to anticipate and memories to cherish. In the spring of 1888, as they prepared for their 4th visit to the Sullivan Ranch, unexpected news arrived. Robert Sullivan's health had deteriorated rapidly following a winter illness. His letter requested that Isaac come as soon as possible to discuss the future of the breeding program. "You should go immediately," Wylie urged when Isaac shared the news. "We can follow in a few weeks as planned." Isaac hesitated. "I don't like traveling without you and the children." "We'll be fine," Wylie assured him. "And Robert needs your expertise now, not later." With reluctance, Isaac departed alone, promising to send word as soon as he knew more about the situation. Wylie managed their home business and continued teaching, while the children counted days until they could join their father. A telegram arrived 10 days after Isaac's departure. "Sullivan Pass stop request. You all come stop important matters to discuss stop love Isaac." The journey to Virginia City felt different without Isaac's presence, though Wylie kept the children's spirits high with games and stories. When they arrived, Isaac was waiting at the stage-coach stop, his expression a mixture of sorrow and something Wylie couldn't quite identify, perhaps anticipation. "Robert's funeral was yesterday," he explained as they settled into rooms at the hotel rather than the Sullivan home. "Margaret, his widow, asked that we stay in town for now. The ranch is unsettled." "What did he want to discuss with you?" Wylie asked that night after the children were asleep. Isaac sat on the edge of their bed, his expression serious. Robert had no children, no clear heir for the ranch. He and Margaret had discussed options before his condition worsened. Wylie waited, sensing there was more. "They want us to consider taking over the operation," Isaac said finally. "Not just as consultants, as owners. Margaret would retain a portion, but she wants to return to her family in St. Louis. She has no interest in running the ranch herself." Wylie sat beside him, stunned by the magnitude of what he was suggesting. "Move to Virginia City. Leave Fort Benton," Isaac nodded. "It's an incredible opportunity, Wylie. The breeding program is already established, the facilities are first-rate, and the Sullivan name carries weight in racing circles across the country." "But our home," Wylie said softly. "The school, my father and brother, everything we've built." "I know." Isaac took her hands in his. "I told Margaret I couldn't make any decision without discussing it with you. This affects all of us." They talked long into the night, weighing possibilities and responsibilities. The opportunity was undeniably compelling. The Sullivan Ranch represented a chance for Isaac to elevate his work to a level he had never imagined possible. Yet Fort Benton was home, the place where their story had begun, where their children had been born, where family and community connections ran deep. "We don't need to decide immediately," Isaac said as dawn approached. "Margaret has given us time to consider." In the days that followed, they toured the ranch together, seeing it through new eyes, not as visitors but as potential stewards. The children were enchanted by the elegant racehorses and sprawling pastures. Wylie found herself imagining teaching in Virginia City's established school, perhaps eventually opening her own academy, as she'd sometimes dreamed of doing in Fort Benton. A week into their visit, as they prepared to return home to discuss the matter with Wylie's father, an unexpected letter arrived from Fort Benton. Thomas Warren had written with news that changed everything. A fire had swept through part of town, including the street where Wylie's school stood. While no lives were lost, several businesses and the partially constructed schoolhouse were destroyed. "The town council is debating whether to rebuild the school now or wait until next spring," Thomas wrote. "There's talk of sending the older children to Great Falls for their education in the meantime." The news hit Wylie hard. She had poured her heart into the school, seeing it as her contribution to Fort Benton's future. Isaac found her on the hotel balcony that evening, staring at the sunset with the letter clutched in her hand. "Maybe it's a sign," she said quietly as he joined her, "that it's time for a new chapter." Isaac didn't respond immediately, giving her space to process her feelings. "Whatever we decide," he said finally, "we decide together, as we always have." Their return to Fort Benton was somber. The charred remains of the schoolhouse stood as a stark reminder of how quickly circumstances could change. Wylie's father, after hearing about the Sullivan Ranch opportunity, surprised them with his perspective. "When I was trapped in that mine years ago," James Warren said as they sat around the family dinner table, "I made a promise that if I survived, I wouldn't waste a single day living in fear. Life is too short for that." He looked from Isaac to Wylie. "Don't make your decision based on what you might lose. Make it based on what you might gain." Through summer and into fall, the Vance family weighed their options. Isaac traveled once more to Virginia City to discuss terms with Margaret Sullivan's lawyer. Wylie met with the town council about rebuilding the school, which they now planned for the following spring. The decision, when it finally crystallized, wasn't what either of them had initially expected. On a clear October day, as golden leaves drifted down from the cottonwoods along the Missouri, Isaac and Wylie walked the perimeter of their property, talking through the plan that had gradually taken shape between them. "So we keep our home here," Isaac summarized, "but expand the Virginia City operation with a partner to manage it year-round." Wylie nodded. "We spend summers there when school is not in session, and you travel back and forth quarterly as needed. The children get the best of both worlds: stability here and new experiences there. And you still get to open your academy in the new schoolhouse, while helping establish a similar program in Virginia City during our summer residency," Wylie added. "It's not conventional, but then, neither are we." Isaac laughed, pulling her close as they walked. "No, we certainly are not." The arrangement they proposed satisfied Margaret Sullivan, who was primarily concerned with her late husband's legacy continuing. They found an experienced horseman named Michael Donovan to serve as resident manager in Virginia City, with Isaac providing direction and making regular visits. In Fort Benton, life evolved around their expanded horizons. The new schoolhouse was completed in May of 1889. larger and better equipped than originally planned thanks to additional investment from the Vances and several other families. Wylie's academy approach, offering education not just to children, but to adults seeking to improve their literacy and knowledge, became a model examined by other growing towns in Montana Territory. Their first summer in Virginia City, as partial owners of the Sullivan Ranch, was a whirlwind of activity. Isaac immersed himself in elevating the breeding program, introducing new training methods and expanding their network of buyers. Wylie established connections with local educators, organizing a summer learning program that quickly gained popularity. James, now 9, and Ella, 7, thrived in both environments. In Fort Benton, they were known as the children of the cowboy who had saved the miners and the teacher who had built the school. In Virginia City, they were the young heirs to the Sullivan legacy, learning horsemanship from their father and social graces from the prominent families who made up their summer social circle. Did you ever imagine this life? Wylie asked Isaac one evening as they sat on the porch of the Sullivan ranch house, watching their children race their ponies across the pasture. When you rode into Fort Benton that day, could you have pictured any of this? Isaac shook his head, his expression thoughtful. I was just passing through, looking for temporary work before moving on. If you had told me then that a mine collapse would lead to all this. He gestured to encompass the ranch, their children, and Wylie herself. The best things in life often come from the most unexpected beginnings, Wylie mused, remembering her vigil at the mine entrance, tears streaming down her face as she waited for news of her family, and of the brave cowboy who had disappeared into the darkness to save them. As Montana achieved statehood later that year, the Vance family's dual existence became their new normal. Their reputation grew in both communities. Isaac, as an innovative horse trainer, whose methods were increasingly sought after by ranchers and the military alike. Wylie as an educator, whose progressive approaches drew attention from territorial officials developing standardized education programs. Years passed, bringing changes both subtle and profound. James, showing his father's affinity for horses and open spaces, began taking on responsibilities at both properties while still pursuing his education. Ella revealed a quick mind and artistic talent that Wylie nurtured carefully, arranging for special lessons during their Virginia City summers. In 1894, 15 years after the mine collapse that had brought them together, Isaac and Wylie celebrated their anniversary with a journey neither had anticipated. A trip east to Kentucky, where one of their Virginia City-bred horses was competing in prestigious races. The venture represented the culmination of years of careful breeding and training, and an opportunity to expand their horizons yet again. Should we tell them? Isaac asked as they walked arm in arm through the grounds of Churchill Downs, admiring the elegant surroundings so different from the frontier settings they were accustomed to. Wylie pressed a hand to her stomach, still flat beneath her fashionable traveling suit. At 37, she had been surprised to discover she was expecting their third child, a blessing they hadn't anticipated at this stage of their lives. "Let's wait until we return home," she suggested. "I want to tell James and Ella first in person." Isaac nodded, covering her hand with his own. "Another adventure begins," he said softly. Their son Daniel was born the following spring, bringing renewed joy to their household. James, by then 15, took his role as eldest brother seriously, already planning the horsemanship lessons he would eventually provide. Ella, 13, appointed herself assistant caretaker, reading stories to her infant brother and singing the lullabies she remembered from her own childhood. As the 19th century drew to a close, Fort Benton had transformed from the frontier town Isaac had ridden into an established community connected to the wider world by railroad and telegraph. The Silver Creek mine was long closed, its entrance sealed and gradually reclaimed by nature, but the town had diversified and thrived. The Vance properties, their original homestead near Fort Benton, and the Sullivan Ranch outside Virginia City, had become successful enterprises linked by family bonds and shared vision. Their educational initiatives in both communities had expanded, with Wylie now overseeing a network of teachers implementing her methods. In the summer of 1900, as a new century dawned, the extended Vance family gathered at their Fort Benton home to celebrate James Warren's 80th birthday. The old miner, still hale despite his years, sat in a place of honor as 4 generations of family filled the yard. "A toast," Isaac said, raising his glass as twilight settled over the gathering. "To James Warren, who taught me the value of family and courage when I had neither. And to the silver lining of that terrible day at Silver Creek Mine, that in trying to save others, I found my own salvation." Across the table, his eyes met Wylie's. 21 years had passed since she had stood at the mouth of the mine with tears streaming down her face, waiting for word of her father and brother, and for the return of the mysterious cowboy who had risked everything for strangers. In that moment, surrounded by the family they had built and the legacy they continued to create together, Wylie felt the full circle of their journey. From crisis had come connection. From risk had come reward. From 2 separate paths had emerged a shared journey. Neither could have imagined that fateful day in Fort Benton, when a cowboy broke into a mine to save trapped workers, and she waited at the mouth with tears that had ultimately given way to a lifetime of joy.